Warning! You're about to experience Metamodernism Uncensored, a podcast for diagnosing the cultural rot of the postmodern world and searching for real truth. It's time to question everything, especially yourself.
Welcome to Metamodernism Uncensored, the podcast diagnosing our postmodern world and its cultural rot and attempting to push through to achieve metamodern synthesis.
Glad to be here for this one. It's going to be intense.
It really is. So I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine you are born in this just pitch black room.
Okay.
And your neck is shackled, like heavily chained. You cannot turn your head. You cannot stand up. You can't look behind you.
Wow. Just total paralysis, basically.
Exactly. The only thing you'll ever see, from your very first breath, your very last breath, is this blank stone wall directly in front of your face.
Like a flat surface in the dark.
Right. But on that surface, there's this constant flickering projection of shadows.
Like a movie screen.
Kind of, yeah. Shapes are moving back and forth. They're interacting, growing larger, shrinking down. And because you have never seen a three-dimensional object.
Because you've been in the dark your whole life.
Yes, right. Because you have never seen the actual sun, or, a tree, or even your own hands, you would completely believe that those two-dimensional flickering shadows were the absolute entirety of existence.
I mean, you wouldn't even have the concept of a shadow, right?
No, not at all. To you, that projection is just reality. It's everything.
You probably name those shadows.
Mm-hmm.
You'd study their movements.
Oh, absolutely.
You would likely build an entire culture, like an entire system of science and mythology around anticipating what those flat gray shapes were going to do next.
That is exactly it. And listen, this isn't just some grim sci-fi thought experiment. This is the premise of literally one of the most enduring philosophical frameworks in human history.
Plato's allegory of the cave.
Plato's Cave, written roughly 2,450 years ago.
Give or take.
Yeah. And the reason we are forcing you to sit in that dark, terrifying cave today for this deep dive is because of how aggressively this ancient text is being utilized right now in our modern era.
It's being heavily weaponized.
It is. We are looking at a blog post today titled Plato's Allegory of the Cave and Its Connection to the Present. It was written by Dempsey and published on a libertarian platform called The Opposition.
And this was written during a very specific time, wasn't it?
It was. It was written during the absolute bleakest moments of the COVID-19 lockdown years. And our goal today is to unpack exactly how Dempsey maps this classical Greek philosophy onto those intense, polarized cultural clashes, and then see how it applies to us now in 2026.
Right, but before we delve into the mechanics of his actual argument, I think we really need to establish a very rigid analytical boundary for this deep dive.
Yeah, that's a good call. Lay out the ground rules.
Because Dempsey's essay, it deals with highly charged political flashpoints. He writes extensively and with this deep, palpable frustration about the pandemic policies, mask mandates, vaccines, and even the modern sociological debates around gender identity.
Right, and to be absolutely 100% clear to you listening, we are taking no sides here.
Not at all.
We are not here to endorse Dempsey's political views, and we're not here to condemn them either. We are not litigating his specific scientific claims or political leanings.
Our purpose is strictly analytical. We are treating his essay like a blueprint.
Exactly. We want to examine how he constructs this argument and how he uses an ancient epistemological framework to articulate modern anxieties. We are diagnosing the cultural rot to try and find some metamodern synthesis.
We're essentially dismantling an engine to see how the pistons fire.
I like that analogy.
Dempsey uses Plato to diagnose what he sees as a societal sickness. But to understand his diagnosis, we have to start by understanding the clinical tools he's using.
Which means we need to look really closely at the original mechanics of Plato's Cave. Let's unpack this.
Let's do it. Dempsey spends the first half of his piece making sure that the reader actually understands the physical layout of this illusion.
Because it's not just shadows appearing out of nowhere, right?
Right. It's highly engineered. So you have the chained prisoners staring at the wall, but what is actually happening behind them?
Right. How is the trick done?
Well, elevated and at a distance behind these prisoners, there is a massive roaring bonfire.
Okay.
And that fire is the singular light source in this whole subterranean space.
Mm-hmm.
But between the blazing fire and the backs of the prisoners, there's a raised walkway, like a corridor.
In a sort of stage area.
Exactly. And along this corridor, other men are walking back and forth, operating much like stagehands in a theater.
And what are these stagehands carrying? Because this is the crucial part.
They are carrying objects like statues of animals, wooden cutouts of trees, tools, architectural shapes.
Just holding them up.
Right, they hold them up above their heads as they walk. So the light from the bonfire hits the objects, and that casts these sharp shadows onto the blank wall in front of the prisoners.
And there's an audio component too, right?
Yeah, the stagehands are talking to each other, and their voices echo off the cave walls. So the prisoners, whose senses are entirely confined, naturally associate the echoing sounds with the flickering shadows they're seeing.
It's brilliant. It is a fully immersive, multi-sensory deception.
Completely immersive.
If we were to update this for a modern audience, think about being born wearing a really high-end virtual reality headset.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
Right. One that is permanently affixed to your skull. You can't take it off. The digital world projected into your retinas, the spatial audio pumped directly into your ears, the haptic feedback in your chair. That is your entire universe.
You wouldn't know anything else.
Exactly. If you spent 30 years in that headset and saw a digital apple, you would believe that was what an apple actually was. You wouldn't even have the conceptual vocabulary to understand that outside the headset, there's a biological universe with real fruit growing on physical trees.
The digital pixels are your absolute reality.
Yeah. And that parallel really highlights the core philosophical concept Dempsey is pulling from Plato here, which is epistemology.
Right, epistemology.
Yeah.
Which is basically the philosophical study of knowledge,
Yeah.
how we know what we know and the limits of that knowledge.
It's asking, how do I know this is real?
Exactly. And Dempsey outlines Plato's division of existence into two mutually exclusive realms.
Yeah.
You have the sensible world and the intelligible world.
I want to pause and push on this for a second, this sensible versus intelligible divide, because it feels like the load-bearing pillar for everything Dempsey argues later about the pandemic and the current culture.
It absolutely is.
If the sensible world is just everything we can perceive with our senses like sight, sound, touch, why does Plato, and by extension Dempsey, fundamentally distrust it so much? I mean, we rely on our senses to survive every single second of the day.
We do, yeah. But cognitive science and ancient philosophy, they actually agree that our senses are easily hacked.
Hacked how?
Well, Plato argued that the sensible world is in a constant state of flux and decay. It's a world of appearances. I mean, think of an optical illusion.
Oh, sure.
Or how a straight stick looks bent when you dip it into a glass of water.
Right, your eyes are literally lying to you.
Exactly. In the allegory, the shadows on the wall represent this sensible world. It's a fabricated, highly manipulative realm where you are just constantly reacting to flawed inputs.
Which implies that anything relying on empirical observation, just looking at the world around you, is inherently suspect.
From this strict Platonic viewpoint, yes.
So what is the alternative? If we can't trust what we see and hear, what is this intelligible world?
The intelligible world is the realm of absolute, unfiltered, objective truth, with a capital T.
Okay.
And this world cannot be accessed through the eyes or the ears. It can only be accessed through pure intellect, reason, and intense philosophical rigor.
So it's conceptual.
Right. It's the realm of eternal concepts, mathematical truths, pure justice, absolute definitions. In the allegory, the intelligible world is represented by the reality outside the cave, bathed in the natural, revealing light of the actual sun.
So the entire goal, then, of the philosopher is to break the chains, turn away from those comforting, sensible shadows, and drag oneself up into the intelligible sunlight.
That's the mission.
But Dempsey makes a really big point to emphasize that this is not a pleasant experience. I think people often view the allegory of the cave as this triumphant, happy story of self-actualization.
Oh, it is not happy. The actual text is agonizing.
It sounds violently disruptive. Dempsey really dwells on the pain of escape, and he does it for a specific rhetorical reason.
Yeah, if a prisoner is suddenly unchained, right, and forced to turn around and look directly at that roaring bonfire, their eyes would physically burn.
The light would be excruciating after a lifetime in the darkness.
And the psychological shock would be even worse. The blurred, intensely bright figures of the real objects the stagehands are carrying, those would seem infinitely less real to the prisoner than the crisp, familiar shadows they had watched their entire life.
The prisoner would experience massive cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. They would actively crave the darkness. They'd want to turn back to the wall because the illusion makes sense, while the truth is chaotic and it hurts.
Wow. And if someone physically grabbed this prisoner drag them up the steep, jagged tunnel and force them out into the actual sunlight?
They would be completely incapacitated. It requires a long, agonizing period of adjustment to even begin to perceive the truth of the sun.
But the climax of the allegory, the piece that Dempsey really uses to anchor his political outrage later on, is what happens when this enlightened prisoner tries to go back.
The return journey. This is where it gets dark.
Literally and figuratively. So, the freed prisoner goes back down into the gloom to tell his friends, hey, you are living a lie, the shadows are just puppets.
But when he gets down there, his eyes are no longer adjusted to the darkness.
Right. He is effectively blind in the cave now. He stumbles around. He can't identify the shadows anymore.
So to the chained prisoners, he just looked like a clumsy, blithering fool.
They don't view him as a savior?
Not at all. They view him as a cautionary tale. Dempsey notes that they mock him. They conclude that leaving the cave ruins your mind and it ruins your eyesight.
And it escalates way beyond mockery, doesn't it? Plato writes, and Dempsey reiterates this heavily, that if the chained prisoners could get their hands on the man who was trying to free them, they would murder him.
Yes. They are so aggressively attached to their comfortable illusion that they will use lethal force to protect it from the disruption of truth.
And this was not just a hypothetical dynamic for Plato. Dempsey specifically names the historical anchor for this violence.
Right. The story of the man bringing truth to the chained masses and being killed for it. That is Plato's direct allegory for the fate of his own mentor, Socrates.
Right, Socrates, who famously challenged the dogmas and the shadows of Athenian society.
He relentlessly questioned their definitions of justice and piety.
Right.
And in response, the Athenian democratic state put him on trial, voted to condemn him, and executed him.
So the foundation Dempsey is laying here is that society has a lethal allergy to objective truth. People do not want to be woken up.
That's his baseline assumption.
But Dempsey doesn't leave this in ancient Athens. He executes this very sharp chronological pivot. He brings this entire apparatus, the chains, the fire, the stagehands, directly into the 21st century.
Which is a bold move.
It is. How does he justify mapping an ancient philosophical metaphor onto modern society?
He does it by basically declaring a state of epistemological war.
Okay, unpack that.
Dempsey's core thesis is that 2,450 years after Plato, the postmodernists have besieged society. He claims they have waged utter war on logic, truth, and reality.
And it's crucial to note, in the text, he capitalizes logic, truth, and reality.
Treating them as proper nouns.
Absolute, immutable monuments.
Precisely. That capitalization ties directly back to that intelligible world we were talking about.
Right.
To Dempsey, truth is not subjective. It is not dependent on your cultural background or your lived experience or your personal feelings. It is an objective monolith, just like the physical sun outside the cave.
Whereas postmodernism, generally speaking, operates on the premise that much of what we consider reality is actually socially constructed.
Right. It questions the existence of overarching, absolute narratives, suggesting that truth is often a reflection of power dynamics and language.
So when a postmodernist says, hey, let's deconstruct this narrative to see whose interests it serves, Dempsey sees that not as a valid academic exercise, but as a hostile act.
He sees it as an act designed to drag humanity away from the sun and back into the cave. He views it as the forced worship of shadows.
And he makes a really specific historical comparison here that I found interesting. He argues that in Plato's time, the masses rejected the difficult reasoning of philosophy in favor of the warm blanket of religious dogma, the myths of the Greek gods.
Right.
But today, he argues that the dogma hasn't disappeared, it has simply changed shape. Society is now under a hegemony monopolized by what he calls zealots and propagandists.
But here's where we have to look closely at his timeline. Dempsey writes that today, with centuries of supposed progress under our belts, humanity has far less of an excuse for its ignorance.
Which begs the question, is he suggesting that the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, all this supposed progress actually failed us? Or is he saying we just used our advanced technology to build a better bonfire?
It's definitively the latter.
Yeah.
This is a critical piece of his argument. Dempsey is arguing that the institutions we typically rely on to guide us out of the cave academia, modern medicine, the media, state health apparatuses, they have fundamentally betrayed their mandate.
So they aren't helping us escape.
No, in his view, these modern institutions have become the stagehands walking along the corridor.
Wow.
The narratives they project are the new bonfire. Progress hasn't enlightened us. It has industrialized the shadow-making process. It's created a vastly more convincing illusion that the public is willingly chained to.
That is a staggering indictment of modern society. He's essentially saying the guardians of knowledge are the ones running the simulation. And he doesn't just leave this as some abstract philosophical critique. He names specific recent phenomena as tactile evidence of this modern cave, which brings us directly to his analysis of the years 2020 through 2024, the COVID era.
This is where the essay shifts from classical philosophy into raw, contemporary political critique.
And this is where we really want to attempt to view this through a metamodern lens, right? Because Dempsey points to a very specific, mundane image as physical proof of a subjugated populace, people wearing cloth masks in grocery stores.
Right. And we need to look closely at how he analyzes this. He doesn't just treat the masked shopper as someone with a different risk assessment regarding public health.
No, he goes much further.
He characterizes the behavior as ignorance and religious fanaticism. He argues that people continued this practice despite what he calls a mountain of peer-reviewed evidence showing the ineffectiveness of it.
And looking back now from 2026, this is where we can really start diagnosing the cultural rot and trying to push through to that metamodern synthesis. Because when we analyze the post-truth findings of those awful COVID years, we have to acknowledge what actually happened with the science.
Right.
We saw institutions forcing people to wear cloth masks when the rigorous science of the day eventually proved they did not stop transmission. We saw society absolutely ostracizing people who refused to get the vaccine, largely because the masses falsely believed it was a sterilizing immunization.
Which it wasn't. It did in fact stop the spread, but the cultural narrative insisted it did.
Exactly. And the rhetorical strategy Dempsey employs here is fascinating because it relies on a complete inversion of terminology. Let's look at how he describes the medical interventions of the pandemic.
He strips the vaccine of its medical classification entirely. He refers to it instead as a therapeutic that is merely disguising itself as a vaccine.
And the word disguising is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting there.
Oh, absolutely.
It immediately invokes the cave imagery again. A therapeutic masquerading as a vaccine is a shadow masquerading as a real object. It is the stagehand holding up a wooden cutout and demanding you call it a real horse.
That's a perfect way to put it. And he then categorizes this medical intervention, along with social distancing and lockdowns, as faith-based practices.
Which is such an aggressive intellectual maneuver.
It really is. The proponents of masks, vaccines, and lockdowns during the pandemic heavily relied on the phrase, follow the science.
Trust the science, yeah. It became this ultimate buzzword.
Right. They framed their actions as the ultimate expression of rational, data-driven, objective behavior. But Dempsey takes their core vocabulary and just flips it.
He uses the language of theology to describe the disciples of science. He uses terms like faith-based, fanaticism, and mass delusion of the faithful to describe people following these public health mandates.
Because in Dempsey's framework, when science, with a capital S, is enforced by state mandates and intense societal pressure, it ceases to be a rigorous method of inquiry. It becomes a blind dogma.
It becomes the new warm blanket, replacing the religious superstitions of antiquity.
Exactly.
And if we look for the metamodern synthesis here, what would Plato have seen if he looked at the COVID years?
I think he absolutely would have identified the scared, huddled, postmodern masses staring at the shadows on the cave wall.
Right. Because trust the science became a mantra to be chanted. Meanwhile, real, nuanced science, the kind that questioned the efficacy of lockdowns or the transmission rates among the vaccinated, was actively being ignored and prosecuted.
Which is the exact definition of being in the cave.
Yeah.
Punishing the person trying to bring in new light.
Yes. He is looking at his political opponents and basically saying, you think you are being enlightened and scientific, but you are actually acting like members of a pre-industrial cult kneeling before an altar.
It's a framing designed to entirely delegitimize the opposing viewpoint. By framing it as a delusion, there's no need to even debate the policy. You're merely diagnosing a hallucination.
And he ties this diagnosis back to a classic Greek tragic flaw, hubris.
Overweening, catastrophic pride. Dempsey paints a picture of a modern humanity that believes, through sheer faith and mass compliance with lockdowns and masking, it can exert control over nature itself. He equates it to the arrogance of believing we could fight back the tide if we just believed hard enough.
He writes, and I'm quoting here, We are surely capable of moving mountains, as long as our audience is commanded to shut fast their eyes and believe strong enough thoughts.
The sarcasm there is just palpable.
It really is.
Yeah.
He is critiquing the bureaucratic assumption that a rapidly mutating respiratory virus could be controlled by governmental decrees, framing that belief as the ultimate shadow on the wall.
But here's where I find myself getting stuck, and where this philosophy seems to hit a wall of its own.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, look at the architecture of his argument. Dempsey is clearly positioning himself as the freed prisoner, right?
Oh, definitely.
He has felt the sun, he knows the objective truth, and he is looking down into the gloom at the masked masses, pitying their delusion. It is a position of absolute epistemic superiority.
I see what you mean, but couldn't you argue that literally every political faction operates from that exact same assumption?
That's exactly my point. If you were to sit down with a public health official who rigidly enforced those mask mandates in 2021, they would use the exact same Platonic allegory against Dempsey.
Oh, totally. They would say, we have the epidemiological data, we are standing in the sunlight of empirical facts, and the people refusing to wear masks are chained in a dark cave of internet conspiracy theories and anti-science shadows.
Exactly. If everyone thinks they are the ones standing outside the cave, how does the allegory actually help us find the truth?
Man, that is the danger of relying on foundationalist allegories in a fractured media ecosystem. What you are describing is a state of epistemic closure.
A situation where a group's belief system is completely insulated from outside evidence.
Right. In the modern era, algorithms and curated media diets act as customized caves for every single ideological demographic. Everyone has their own bespoke bonfire and their own dedicated stagehands.
Dempsey is arguing from a framework that assumes there is only one sun, and he alone has found it. But functionally, society is operating in a multiplex of different caves, with each group screaming that the other guys are the ones looking at shadows.
It is a mirror that flatters whoever picks it up. But for Dempsey, the public health policies of the COVID era were not just an isolated panic. He doesn't view them as a one-off mistake.
No, he views them as a symptom of a much deeper, more terminal rejection of reality. Which brings us to his next major cultural critique.
Right, because he writes that, sadly, the future looks even more bleak than this. He shifts his focus from the mechanics of medical policy to the fundamental definitions of biological identity.
He argues that the societal mechanisms that forced compliance during the pandemic are now being utilized to force a rejection of basic biological reality.
Yeah.
He explicitly targets the concept of gender fluidity.
And he explicitly labels gender fluidity as a modern shadow on the cave wall. He contrasts this concept with what he terms the simple and straightforward truth that sex and gender are both identical and binary.
Now, this specific critique perfectly illustrates the collision between classical foundationalism and postmodern sociological thought.
How do you mean?
Well, as we discussed, postmodernism often posits that many aspects of human identity, including gender roles and expressions, are socially constructed. They're fluid, they're evolving, and they're highly subjective.
Right.
To a sociologist utilizing a postmodern framework, acknowledging the fluidity of gender is a way of breaking the rigid historical chains of binary constraints. It is seen as an act of liberation.
Leaving the cave, essentially.
Exactly. But Dempsey is operating from a classical framework where reality is fixed and immutable, like a mathematical equation.
Right. To him, biological sex and gender are inextricably linked and binary. That is his sun. It is a fixed, objective reality that exists regardless of how society feels about it.
Therefore, any societal or institutional movement that attempts to decouple sex and gender or suggests they exist on a spectrum is not a liberation movement to him. It is an elaborate, highly coordinated deception.
In the language of the allegory, it is the stagehands carving a brand new wooden puppet, parading it in front of the bonfire, and using institutional megaphones to convince the chained prisoners that a new reality has been discovered.
He views the acceptance of a malleable reality as a form of mass hysteria.
Think about what this means for our ability to actually communicate with one another today. When you look at the cultural debates dominating the 2020s, they feel completely intractable.
They really do.
They don't feel like political disagreements over, say, tax policy. They feel like existential threats. And Dempsey's essay perfectly diagnoses why. These are fundamental ontological disagreements over the nature of existence itself.
Ontology being the philosophical study of being and reality. When two groups have entirely different ontological baselines, debate becomes impossible.
Exactly. If one group firmly believes that gender fluidity is the enlightened truth, The sun and traditional gender binaries are the oppressive illusion, but another group, like Dempsey, believes the biological binary is the objective sun, and gender fluidity is a fabricated shadow. There is zero room for compromise.
You cannot meet in the middle when you believe the person across the table is literally hallucinating.
Right. You are arguing across two completely incompatible definitions of reality.
This explains the intense hostility in modern discourse. If the opposing side gains cultural dominance, it doesn't just mean your political party lost an election. It means society has collectively agreed to live inside a lie.
It means you are being forced to validate a shadow.
Exactly.
And if we fast forward to today, to 2026, and we try to analyze what other current events Plato might see as being postmodern in nature, I mean, are we still huddling in the cave staring at shadows? Have the shadows just morphed?
Oh, I think they absolutely have morphed.
Yeah.
The hallucinations have just taken on new forms.
Right. Let's look at geopolitics for a second. To find that metamodern synthesis, look at how society, and specifically the media, projects the image of Iran right now.
It's a perfect example.
Society acts like Iran is this immediate, existential, apocalyptic threat, a massive monster on the cave wall. But if you look at the objective sunlight, the actual data, they haven't even had a nuclear weapons program since 2003.
Right.
They don't have any actual way to attack the U.S. mainland. But the stagehands of the military-industrial complex and the media walk back and forth, holding up these terrifying wooden cutouts of Iranian threats.
And the huddled masses stare at those shadows, living in fear, consenting to massive defense budgets and aggressive foreign policies based entirely on a hallucination.
It is the exact same mechanism as the COVID panic, just a different shadow. The fearful masses are still huddling.
Which raises a deeply unsettling question about the mechanics of this modern cave. If the masses are willingly chained to these illusions, whether it's regarding public health, biology, or foreign policy, who exactly is casting these shadows?
Who is tending the bonfire?
And why? This leads into Dempsey's most cynical analysis. He argues that the postmodern iteration of the cave is actually far more nefarious than Plato's original concept.
Because in Plato's version, the stagehands are largely just mechanical functions of the thought experiment, right? They are just there to make the allegory work logically.
Right. But in Dempsey's analysis, the modern stagehands operate with deliberate malice.
Okay. Deliberate malice.
He writes that many of the people controlling the modern cave are actually completely aware of the sun. They know what the real world looks like. They understand the objective truths.
But instead of acting as the philosopher and trying to free their fellow citizens, they actively choose to chain them up and feed them a diet of shadows. Why? What is the incentive structure for keeping society in the dark?
Power. Pure power. Dempsey writes, the shadows and the ability to project them, therefore, are power.
It's a stark analysis of information warfare.
It really is.
Well,
If you can control the rhetoric, if you can define what is a shadow and what is real, you control the behavior of the entire populace. Dempsey describes this dynamic as controlling rhetoric and sharing truth like water from a poisoned well.
so truth is no longer an ideal to be sought. It is a synthetic commodity to be rationed by the state or by institutions.
Precisely.
He is arguing that the media, academia, and government intentionally project the shadows of rolling crises, whether viral, cultural, or geopolitical, specifically to maintain subjugation.
But he adds a psychological twist to this that I found genuinely chilling.
Okay.
He suggests that this system of deliberate manipulation eventually degrades into total incompetence. It is the trap of the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh.
Dempsey suggests that eventually, these modern jailers will project the illusion for so long and with such intensity that they will forget they were the ones who built it in the first place.
They will lose sight of the fact that it was originally a mechanism of control, and they will actually begin to believe their own propaganda.
The puppet masters forget they're holding puppets.
Dempsey frames this degradation bluntly, writing, "Man is even more stupid than he is wicked."
Which is quite a line.
It really is. The initial malice of the elites eventually gives way to sheer delusion. They become trapped in the very matrix they coded.
And this leads to a terrifying conclusion that ties perfectly back to the historical murder of Socrates.
Right, because Dempsey warns that since these modern jailers have so thoroughly brainwashed themselves with their own institutional shadows, they have become hyper-fragile.
Extremely fragile.
If they were suddenly confronted with the actual truth, if the system failed and they felt the sun on their face, they wouldn't experience an awakening. They would be violently blinded by it.
And just like the chained prisoners in antiquity, Dempsey asserts that these modern jailers would happily and willingly kill anyone who dare to show them any hint of truth beyond the shadows.
They would use the full force of their institutional power to destroy anyone who threatened the narrative that justifies their existence.
It is an incredibly bleak, almost apocalyptic vision of societal collapse, where the blind are maliciously leading the blind.
It is an expression of profound systemic alienation. And I think to fully understand the specific ideological flavor of this alienation, we really need to look at the author himself.
Who is the person mapping this ancient Greek tragedy onto the 2020s and beyond?
Right. The biographical context provided in the source is highly illuminating. Sean Dempsey is identified as having moved to New Hampshire as one of the first 100 Free Staters.
Let's unpack the Free State Project, because that is not a casual political affiliation.
Not at all.
The Free State Project is a political migration movement launched in the early 2000s. The explicit goal was to recruit thousands of libertarian-leaning individuals to move to a single, low-population state, New Hampshire, in order to concentrate their voting power.
And the objective is to drastically reduce the size and scope of local and state government, maximizing individual liberty at the expense of state authority.
So Dempsey is an ideological pioneer. He physically relocated his life to participate in an organized effort to dismantle state coercion.
His bio notes that he unabashedly believes in the U.S. Constitution and the message and principles enshrined by its founders, specifically citing Jefferson, Washington, Franklin, and Adams.
He views the concept of individual freedom not just as a political preference, but as something sacrosanct, something to be defended at all costs.
And when you view the essay through the lens of a free state libertarian, the intensity of the rhetoric makes perfect sense.
It does. The libertarian worldview is fundamentally inherently suspicious of collective state power.
Right. Therefore, any top-down decree, whether it's a lockdown mandate, a forced medical intervention, or a state-endorsed shift in sociological definitions, is viewed not as a debatable policy, but as an existential threat.
It is viewed as an illegitimate chain binding the sovereign individual. Dempsey is using Plato to provide a classical intellectual scaffolding for modern libertarian outrage against the administrative state.
And if we look at the broader context of the opposition website where this was published, we see a fascinating tapestry of how this ideology expresses itself.
What else is on the site?
Well, we see links to other writings by Dempsey that suggest a deep, across-the-board political anxiety. For instance, there is an excerpt from a book titled Trump Again, How Could America Let This Happen? Chapter 3, Faith.
Now that is a crucial detail.
Why?
Because it proves he isn't simply operating as a partisan operative attacking the political left. The title implies a profound dismay at populist movements on the right as well. He seems alienated by the entire spectrum of mainstream American politics.
That makes sense. He also ventures into cultural fiction. There's a story titled Rich Man at the Well, which is described as being loosely based on a tale from Albert Camus's novel The Stranger.
Oh, wow. Camus is a towering figure in absurdist and existentialist philosophy.
Right.
Philosophy is dealing heavily with alienation, the search for meaning in a meaningless world, and the confrontation with the absurd.
And then, somewhat jarringly, there's also a poem.
A poem?
Yeah. A rhyming piece titled Ode to the People's Spud, paying tribute to a potato.
A potato.
Yeah, a potato's potato, the others would call him.
Okay, so when you synthesize all these data points, the rigorous Platonic analysis, the free state migration, the critique of Trump-era populism, the Camus-inspired existential fiction, and the absurdist potato poetry, a very complex profile emerges.
He's eclectic.
Dempsey is not a standard political pundit reciting cable news talking points. He is operating as an independent cultural philosopher.
He is a man desperately trying to synthesize meaning in a world that he feels has entirely lost its moorings. He looks at society and sees a population willfully retreating into the darkness, embracing the comforting illusions provided by corrupt institutions.
And he is frantically pointing toward the sun of objective reality, deeply frustrated that everyone else seems to prefer the high-definition shadows on the wall.
Whether a reader accepts his specific definitions of what constitutes the shadow and what constitutes the sun, the intellectual architecture he uses to express his alienation is undeniable.
He objectively demonstrates how classical philosophy remains a highly potent tool for diagnosing modern cultural rot.
So, we have covered an immense amount of epistemological and political ground today. We started in a subterranean cavern in ancient Athens, exploring Plato's profound realization that human senses are deeply flawed and that society will violently resist the painful transition from comfortable illusion to objective reality.
We then follow Jean Dempsey's translation of that architecture into the 2020s, examining his aggressive assertion that postmodern institutions have replaced the ancient bonfires, waging a deliberate war against absolute truth.
We analyzed how he applied this framework to the COVID-19 pandemic, utilizing a rhetorical inversion that categorized state-mandated science as a blind, faith-based religion and public compliance as the ultimate shadow of hubris.
We explore the ontological clash over gender identity, highlighting how differing foundational definitions of reality make modern cultural debates practically unsolvable.
And we brought it to the present, examining how we are still staring at shadows, like the geopolitical hallucinations regarding Iran, and we examined his bleak conclusion regarding the nature of power.
That modern jailors use information as a commodity of subjugation, eventually brainwashing themselves to the point where they would happily destroy anyone who threatened their fabricated reality.
It is a striking example of how ancient texts do not gather dust. They are constantly resurrected, reinterpreted, and re-weaponized to make sense of the chaos of the present moment.
And this is where the theory meets the reality of your daily life, as the listener.
Exactly. Regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, whether you vehemently agree with Dempsey's libertarian diagnosis, whether you find his conclusions deeply offensive, or whether you fall somewhere entirely different. This deep dive serves as a vital stress test for your own cognitive biases.
Because the human brain is hardwired to seek comfort, to find patterns, and to align with the safety of the tribe. We all inhabit caves.
Every single one of us.
We all possess screens, algorithmic feeds, and insulated social circles that project highly curated shadows onto our walls, constantly validating our pre-existing beliefs and caricaturing the outside world.
We are all vulnerable to mistaking the flickering, two-dimensional projections of our preferred media diets for the totality of existence. The enduring challenge of Plato's allegory is that it demands constant, uncomfortable self-interrogation.
It forces you to ask, am I standing in the painful, objective light of the sun, or am I just admiring a really high-definition shadow that agrees with me?
Right. And as we try to reach that metamodern synthesis, we have to ask the biggest question of all. How can we exit the cave?
What does it take to do this permanently?
Is the species just destined to live and die in that cave? Dempsey's view is quite bleak. It implies that only the few, those precious few dreamers and rare thinkers, those songbirds among vultures, are the ones that break away.
They are the only ones who exit the cave and stare at the sun.
But if so few see the sun, I want to leave you with this final, provocative question. Is that enough?
Is it enough for a gentle few to break away?
Or is that a hollow victory because success must be shared? Victory is not sweet if we leave good men and women behind, sitting there staring at shadows in a cave, living in fear and in doubt and ignorance.
If the cave is entirely self-imposed, built by the prisoners, for the prisoners, and guarded by prisoners who think they are kings, maybe true freedom isn't found in escaping alone.
Maybe true freedom is found in the terrifying task of turning around and extinguishing the bonfire from within. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives presented to you, keep searching for the source of the light, and always remember to examine the shadows on your own walls.
Well, that was today's episode, Metamodernism Uncensored. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you again